March 12, 1944, Saint-Marcel, southern France. Before the war, the road through Saint-Marcel carried only market carts and gossip. Now it carried death. The cobbles were cratered, the trees along the lane sheared by shell fire, and the smell of burned fuel lingered even when the wind changed. Jean Morel had been a carpenter before uniforms replaced customers. His hands still remembered chisels and sawdust. Now they gripped a hammer for different reasons. When the local Maquis cell decided to hold the village, Jean was told, half in jest, "You're the engineer now." He took it literally. Rumour said a German armoured column, 3 panzers, half a dozen trucks, and whatever anger filled their bellies, was pushing south to sweep the valley. The Allies were planning a parachute drop in the mountains beyond. If the road stayed closed for even a day, those drops might reach the resistance alive. Jean crouched on the bridge at the village's edge, studying the water trickling beneath. Beside him knelt Sandrine Lefebvre, a schoolteacher turned lookout, her fingers blackened with paint. Around them lay piles of scavenged wood, broken barrels, doors ripped from their hinges, and a few warped sheets of tin. It was all they had. René, the radio man, shook his head. "We can't stop tanks with kindling." Jean tapped a plank with his hammer. "We're not stopping them. We're convincing them to stop themselves." He started building what he called a lie with nails. Barrel halves became fake dragon's teeth obstacles. Painted planks turned into steel hedgehogs. Across the road he strung ropes tarred black, then dusted them with soil so they looked like old, heavy cables. Beside the bridge he drove stakes into the earth and hung them with boards painted in neat, perfect German script. Achtung Minen, Brücke gesperrt, Sprengung vorbereitet. Sandrine laughed softly. "You even got the umlauts right." "I copied them from the supply crates they left behind," Jean said. "If we're lying, we may as well lie fluently." Through the night they worked. Etienne the beekeeper hauled beams from a collapsed barn. Meek, a dentist turned saboteur, wired together an old field gun whose breech had cracked months ago. It couldn't fire, but under the right light it looked ready to. He stacked a belt of empty shells beside it and rubbed them with oil until they shone. René looped a gramophone motor to a captured radio speaker. When powered, it hissed fragments of recorded orders. "Hold fire. 3 vehicles ahead." Enough to make any listening ear cautious. By dawn, Saint-Marcel looked like a fortress drawn by a drunk artist. From the hills, the barricade seemed solid. A line of barrels, cables, and sandbags, actually flour sacks filled with stones. The broken bridge wore fake demolition charges, lumps of blackened clay wired to a box hidden under the reeds. The church bell tower smoked faintly from a pot of damp straw to suggest an artillery observer's signal. Everything smelled of tar, oil, and fear. Jean stood back to admire the work. His pulse pounded, not from pride but disbelief. "If they see this from 50 meters," he said, "they'll never risk it." René gave a doubtful grunt. "And if they come to 20? John smiled without humour. "Then we pray they're still tired." They had 6 fighters in total. 6 rifles, 4 grenades, 1 submachine gun that jammed if it sneezed. Yet the road had to seem guarded by an army. Jean spread them thin behind hedges, gave each a sector, and told them the secret of the day: noise saves bullets. By mid-morning, the ground began to tremble. A distant engine growl rolled over the fields like thunder behind hills. The birds fell silent. René pressed his ear to the soil. Panzers. Jean climbed the parapet and scanned the ridge through borrowed binoculars. Dust clouds, black specks resolving into trucks and the blunt snouts of tanks. "Positions!" he called. Sandrine crouched behind the fake gun, scarf tied over her hair. Etienne melted into the orchard, Meek lay under the bridge with a spool of dead wire in his hands, his detonator. Jean took shelter by the Mary doorway, heart drumming faster than the engines. Minutes later, the first German scouts appeared, 2 motorcycles with sidecars. They slowed at the sight of the warning signs. One rider gestured, uncertain. The other lifted his goggles, squinting at the bridge, at the fake charges, at the old gun that seemed to wait for him. He shouted something back to his comrades. Jean couldn't hear the words, but understood the meaning. Something's wrong. Behind the bikes came the staff car and the first tank. Its turret bore the number 311, the paint dust-streaked but proud. The commander rose from the hatch, binoculars glinting in the pale sun. Jean held his breath. The officer scanned the bridge for a long time. Then, slowly, he lowered his glasses, spoke to the man beside him, and pointed to the signs. The staff car stopped. 2 engineers stepped out, walking carefully toward the barricade. They moved with the suspicion of men who had seen too many real mines to trust even fake ones. Jean felt sweat trickle down his spine. One wrong detail, a brush stroke too clean, a board too light, and the illusion would break. Sandrine's whisper crackled in his ear through the hand radio. "They're reading the signs. They think it's mind." "Let them," Jean murmured. "That's the truth we want them to believe." The engineers halted at the first rope. One crouched, touched it, sniffed the tar, frowned. He followed it with his eyes to the box half hidden in the reeds. From where he stood, the box looked heavy. He barked something and waved for the others to stay back. René's lips curled into a grin. "He believes in ghosts." Jean whispered, "Then we've already won the morning." But the officers weren't done. The staff car reversed. The tank's engine revved. Dust filled the air. Somewhere down the line, a horn blared, orders rippling backward through the convoy. Jean lowered the binoculars, exhaled, and let his back slide against the Mary wall. "That's 10 minutes," he said softly. 10 minutes for the Allies to breathe. The others didn't answer. They were watching the ridge, waiting for what would come next. Saint-Marcel, 10 a.m. For almost an hour the German column idled on the ridge, a creature sniffing a trap it could not smell. Then engines coughed back to life. 2 motorcycles crept forward again, followed by the squat nose of a half-track carrying sappers. Jean watched through the cracks of the Mary door. "All right," he murmured. Act 2. René turned the gramophone crank. The radio loop came alive with the clipped chatter of imaginary artillerymen. "Hold fire. Range 200. Copy." The tinny voice drifted across the square. Sandrine struck a match to the first smoke pot and kicked it beneath the bridge. A grey plume rolled upward, hugging the road. From the German line, shouts, orders overlapping. The engineers froze, pointing. One waved his hands, motioning the tank to wait. The great machine's engine deepened to an uneasy idle. "They're hearing ghosts," René whispered. Jean nodded. "Then let's haunt them properly." Mick crawled from under the bridge and scratched 2 wires together. The old battery hissed, throwing a brief blue spark. A pop echoed like a distant detonator. Instantly, one of the Germans dove flat. Another cursed loudly enough for even Sandrine to hear. The major in the staff car gestured angrily. The tank commander shrugged, unwilling to gamble 30 tons of steel against an unseen mine. They argued in pantomime, hands, binoculars, shoulders, and finally the major beckoned his engineers back. The convoy halted again. Jean allowed himself a slow breath. 15 minutes, he said. That's half a lifetime in a war. The air filled with the hiss of cooling engines and the nervous shuffle of men. Every sound seemed too loud, the clink of a tool, the clatter of a loose stone. The Maquis crouched behind their hedges, motionless, each heartbeat a drum. Then came the inevitable voice of impatience. A new officer climbed from the staff car, young, confident, his coat too clean. He gestured sharply toward the bridge. The engineers obeyed. They crawled forward, prodding the planks with long poles. One tapped a charge and frowned when it did not explode. He turned to shout back a report. "Now," Jean whispered. René lifted the sten and rattled off 3 short bursts high over their heads. Sandrine answered with 2 rifle cracks from the flank. Bullets chewed the parapet and whined into the air, harmless but convincing. The effect was immediate. The engineers flattened to the ground, shouting. The tank's machine gun roared in reply, shredding shutters and window glass. Jean felt splinters spray his face, dropped to one knee, and fired again into the smoke. "Keep it uneven," he called. "Make us sound many." Etienne banged a spade against the old field gun's shield, clang, 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 while Mick tugged his bell rope twice for emphasis. Chaos had a rhythm, and Jean conducted it like an orchestra of lies. After half a minute, he signalled cease fire. The silence that followed was heavier than noise. Smoke coiled lazily around the bridge. The Germans were hidden in it. Somewhere a man coughed. "They'll pull back now," Sandrine whispered. But the young officer was stubborn. Out of the haze, his voice barked new orders. Men hurried, unspooling a reel of wire. The metallic click of a blasting machine echoed faintly. Jean's stomach tightened. "They're going to blow the road clear." Mike shook his head. "They won't risk it if they think the bridge is mined. They'll test it first." A small test charge went off, just a puff, more dust than flame. The bridge shuddered, but the false charges held. When the smoke cleared, the young officer stepped closer, triumphant. Sandrine met Jean's eyes. "He doesn't believe any more." "Then we make him." Mike lit the last smoke pot and rolled it across the planks. The cylinder hissed violently, thick clouds billowing around the officer's boots. At that same instant, René's gramophone croaked, "Fire on my mark, mark." Panic rippled down the line. The officer stumbled back, waving his arms, shouting for the tank to reverse. Men scattered into ditches. Someone tripped the half-track's horn, which blared absurdly before dying. Jean laughed, a quick, disbelieving sound. "And that's 25. They had turned a handful of props into a wall of fear. Yet he knew it could not last. Somewhere behind those tanks was another convoy, and behind that, men who would not scare so easily. He looked at Sandrine. "When they return, it'll be with orders to clear everything that smokes." She nodded. "Then we'd better make the smoke worth dying for." Jean gazed down the ruined street, the fake gun, the painted signs, the tarred ropes, and felt a carpenter's pride at his workmanship. Every board, every knot, every trick of shadow had done its job. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat and whispered, "Hold a little longer." The engines returned before the echoes of the last gunfire had died. The Germans had regrouped, angrier and heavier. 2 more tanks crawled down the hill, their tracks chewing the mud, their armour smeared with camouflage branches. Between them rolled a bridging truck stacked with planks and explosives. Jean Morel stood in the merry doorway, eyes hollow from smoke and strain. "They're done guessing," he said. "Next time they drive straight through." Sandrine crouched beside the fake field gun, her scarf streaked with soot. "Then we make the road punish them for trying." René twisted the dial of his little receiver. German chatter scratched through the static, orders to clear resistance, to restore the supply route at any cost. He looked up. "They've got no patience left." "Good," John murmured. "Patience makes men careful." He turned to his team. Mike, wire the last real charge under the barrels by the bridge. Etienne, start another smoke pot. We'll make them think the whole lane is primed to blow. The ground trembled as the leading tank advanced, cannon lowered. It crushed one of the fake hedgehogs flat. Tin sheets screeched beneath its tracks. Behind it, infantry hugged the ditches, rifles ready. A machine gunner sprayed the hedges on both sides. Bullets shredded leaves above Jean's head, rattling against the stone walls. René flinched. They're firing blind. Perfect, Jean said. Blind men don't look too closely. Mike's match hissed. The new smoke pot coughed to life, covering the bridge in a grey storm. Sandrine fired 2 quick shots into the fog. The ricochets made the illusion of return fire. Etienne banged the cracked shield of the field gun again. Clang, clang, until the rhythm sounded like artillery reloading. The tank stopped at the bridge approach. For a long second, nothing moved. Then its turret swung toward the Mary. Down! Jean shouted. The shell hit short, exploding against the parapet. The shockwave flattened Jean against the floor. Shards of glass and dust rained down. When his hearing returned, he caught the echo of the tank commander yelling orders. The Germans were advancing again. He crawled to the window, spitting grit. The second tank followed, pushing the first. The bridge creaked under the combined weight. Mike! Jen called. Now! Mike pulled the detonator wire. A brilliant flash tore through the smoke, followed by a thunderous crack. Barrels, planks, and dust leapt skyward. The blast was mostly noise, 6 stolen grenades wired together, but the effect was magnificent. The tanks stopped instantly. Men screamed. One soldier threw himself into the ditch, another dropped his rifle and ran. Sandrine peeked over the gun shield, face pale. They're pulling back. John nodded, trembling. For a minute. Through the thinning smoke, he saw the first tank lurch backward. Its driver misjudged the narrow road, caught a wheel on the collapsed edge of the bridge, and the tonnage shifted with a groan. Metal screamed. The entire left track slid into the ditch. The Panzer toppled, settling crookedly against the embankment. René exhaled. They'll never move it again. John's smile was grim. Then that road is ours. The second tank halted behind its crippled twin, engine growling. The convoy was trapped, trucks nose to tail, hemmed by their own caution. Overhead came the whine of an aircraft engine. Sandrine's eyes went wide. That's not theirs, is it? Jean stepped into the open, scanning the sky. Sunlight flashed off silver wings. A P-47 Thunderbolt swooping low over the valley. The pilot banked once, waggled his wings, and peeled away. A signal. René grinned through smoke-blackened teeth. They saw the fire. They know we're here. Jean's chest loosened. Then all we need to do is stay alive until they come back. The Germans tried once more. The young officer who'd led the engineers climbed from the staff car, shouting above the din. He pointed toward the orchard and waved his men forward to flank. 6 infantry sprinted through the trees, straight into the soaked ground where Jean had buried the captured grenades. A muffled boom rolled through the orchard, followed by screams and the crash of falling branches. The remaining soldiers stopped dead. Jean whispered, "Every lie needs a little truth to make it breathe." Smoke, dust, and confusion blanketed the valley. When the second tank tried to pivot for a better angle, its tread slipped on the churned mud of the first wreck and jammed. The column behind began to reverse chaotically, engines roaring, horns blaring. Jean pressed a trembling hand against the Mary wall to steady himself. "It's over," he said softly. "They'll never clear this road today." René smiled weakly. You turned carpentry into artillery. Jean looked at the burning bridge, at the scattered fake signs still fluttering in the wind. No, he said, just storytelling. And they believed the story. The roar of aircraft returned, two this time, not one. The P-47s came low, sunlight flashing from their wings. They followed the smoke trail like hounds. Jean shouted, "Down! Everyone down!" The thunderbolts released their bombs. The valley exploded again. Tanks, trucks, and half-tracks tossed like dice. When the dust finally settled, nothing moved on the Saint-Marcel road except smoke rising in slow, lazy spirals. Jean lifted his head, coughing. The fake barricade was gone. The lie had burned itself out. But beyond it, the path lay broken, clogged with wreckage. No army would pass here for days. He pushed himself to his feet and looked around. Sandrine was helping Mick limp from the church doorway, René clutching the dead radio to his chest. All alive. Jean's voice cracked from exhaustion. Back to the ridge. We're done here. They walked away through the drifting ash as the sun climbed higher, the valley behind them glowing faintly where imagination had fought armor, and won. When the bombing ended, a strange quiet fell over the valley. It was the kind of silence that follows thunder, thick, suspended, still tasting of metal. Smoke drifted through the poplars, carrying the smell of oil and splintered wood. The once bright road was a scar of craters and wrecks. Jean Morel sat on the broken parapet of the bridge, boots dangling over the stream that had somehow survived every explosion. His hands trembled, black with soot and blood that wasn't his. The air stung his throat, yet every breath felt like proof of life. Behind him, the others moved in slow motion, figures of ash. Sandrine poured water over Mick's cut arm. René gathered the surviving radios. Etienne searched for anyone else who might have crawled from the wreckage. The church bell had fallen from its tower, lying half buried in the square, but it still glimmered when the sunlight touched it. Jean watched a single German helmet float down the stream, spinning gently before catching on a rock. "That's how far belief travels," he said quietly. Sandrine sat beside him, wrapping her scarf around her scraped hands. Belief? He nodded toward the ruins of his handiwork. They believed in what wasn't there, and it stopped them. Wood, paint, smoke, and a little courage. René limped over, half laughing, half coughing. You should have seen their faces when the planes came. They looked up like men seeing ghosts. Jean smiled faintly. Maybe they did. The ghosts of every lie that saved a life. They stayed on the bridge until the sun dipped behind the hills, the smoke turning gold in the low light. Beyond the ridge, the dull rumble of distant guns reminded them the war still lived elsewhere. But for one valley, one day, it had paused. 2 days later. A patrol of Allied scouts arrived from the north, guided by radio fragments that René had somehow managed to send through the static. They found the road blocked by 3 ruined tanks and a barricade that looked more like a collapsed stage set than a battlefield. Their captain, an American named Miller, whistled low when he saw the remains. "You telling me this held up a panzer column?" Jean shrugged. "Long enough." Miller circled a splintered barrel, kicked at a blackened plank, and laughed. "Hell, I've seen bridges built worse than this. Whatever you did here, you bought us time to drop 2 divisions behind them." He offered his hand. Jean hesitated, then shook it. The captain squeezed hard. "Name?" "Morel. Jean Morel." "I'll make sure London hears it," Miller said. "They need stories like this." Jean looked around at his friends, the carpenter, the teacher, the beekeeper, the dentist, the boy with the rifle too long for his arms. "Make sure they hear ours, Captain." This was never a one-man story. Miller nodded. Fair enough. But every story needs a name. Yours will do. Colonel Hugh Bennett skimmed a new intelligence brief. Enemy convoy delayed for 12 hours at Saint-Marcel. Cause: false minefield and demolished bridge constructed by local resistance. Deception successful. He read the next line twice. Deception created by civilian carpenter using wood, paint, and recorded radio transmissions. Bennett grinned and passed it to his adjutant. File that under morale. Title it, The Wooden Wall. By July, the front had moved far beyond the valley. Grass had begun to creep through the cracks in the road. The stream ran clear again. The villagers rebuilt what they could. The café reopened with tables made from the same beams Jean had once used for barricades. Jean sat outside, carving a new sign for the bridge. Sandrine brought him coffee, the first real one in months. You're writing something? He nodded, chiseling each letter slowly. Just a reminder. When she leaned closer, she read the words aloud. Ex maquis, ici, I laisse ont fait croire à la peur. To the resistance. Here, they made fear believe in itself. She smiled. Poetic. Jean shrugged. A carpenter can only tell stories with wood. René approached with a scrap of newspaper. They printed it, he said, handing it over. The article was short but bold. The Phantom Barricade. How French partisans turned paint and courage into a fortress. Jean chuckled softly. Phantom Barricade. Sounds like a magic trick. Sandrine touched his shoulder. It was, Jean. You built a lie that became the truth. He looked down at his hands, scarred, stained, still smelling faintly of tar. Then maybe lies can build peace too, if they're made for the right reason. Years later, travellers passing through the rebuilt village of Saint-Marcel would notice a small wooden sign near the bridge. Its edges were weathered, its paint fading, but the German words still readable. Achtung Minen. No one removed it. Some said it kept looters away. Others said it kept memories near. Old men in the square told the story differently every time. How a carpenter fooled tanks, how the sky saved a village, how courage looked like planks nailed together by candlelight. But every version ended the same. They laughed at his fake barricade, until it stopped a real tank column. And somewhere, beneath the bridge rebuilt from the same timbers, the stream carried away the last flakes of ash from the day imagination held back war.